The door to my office slammed so hard the framed photo of my coding certification fell face down on my desk. Marcus stood there, red-faced, his expensive suit wrinkled from whatever tantrum he'd thrown before storming down here. "Hand over the system controls, Lenora, like a good little employee." His voice dripped with contempt as he leaned over my desk. "You're disposable. This company doesn't need you anymore." I looked up at him calmly, my fingers still resting on the keyboard that controlled everything he thought he owned. He had absolutely no idea what he'd just started. 3 years ago, I walked into Pinnacle Solutions as their new senior software architect, and what I found was a disaster waiting to happen. Their entire infrastructure was held together with digital duct tape and prayers. Customer complaints flooded in daily about delayed orders, payment processing failures, and data corruption. The company was hemorrhaging money faster than a broken fire hydrant, losing clients left and right to more reliable competitors. My direct supervisor, David Chen, pulled me aside during my first week. "Lenora, I'm going to be completely honest with you. We're maybe 6 months away from bankruptcy if we can't fix these systems. The board hired you because your reputation precedes you, but I need to know if you think this is even salvageable." I spent the next 2 weeks analyzing their existing architecture, staying late into the night with nothing but coffee and determination keeping me going. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Their customer database, financial processing, inventory management, and security protocols were all running on separate, incompatible systems that barely communicated with each other. It was like trying to run a symphony orchestra where each musician was playing a different song. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to tear it all down and build something revolutionary from the ground up. For the next 8 months, I worked 18-hour days, sometimes sleeping at my desk rather than going home to my empty apartment. I lived on takeout Chinese food and the occasional sandwich from the cafeteria downstairs. My social life disappeared completely, but I had a vision that kept me going. I was creating something that had never been done before in our industry. I called it the Core Harmony System, and it was beautiful in its complexity. Unlike traditional business software that required multiple programs and constant human intervention, Core Harmony was designed to think, learn, and adapt. It integrated every aspect of the company's operations into one seamless, intelligent network. Customer data flowed directly into inventory management, which automatically adjusted supply orders and delivery schedules. Financial processing happened in real time, with fraud detection and risk assessment built into every transaction. But here's what made Core Harmony truly special, and what I never told anyone except David. I built in proprietary authentication protocols that only I fully understood. These weren't just passwords or security keys, they were multi-layered biometric and behavioral patterns woven into the very fabric of the system's architecture. My fingerprints, my typing patterns, even the way I moved my mouse became part of the system's DNA. I wasn't being paranoid or possessive. I was being smart. I'd worked at enough companies to know that brilliant engineers were often pushed aside once their creations became profitable. I made sure that wouldn't happen to me. The results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months of implementing Core Harmony, our customer satisfaction rates jumped from 62% to 94%. Processing errors dropped to less than 0.1%. Most importantly, our revenue exploded from $2.4 million to $15.6 million annually. We went from the verge of bankruptcy to being the most talked about logistics company in 3 states. I formed close friendships with fellow developers, Sarah Martinez and Tom Bradley, who had front row seats to witness the miracle I was creating. Sarah would bring me coffee during those late nights, and Tom would debate programming philosophy with me during lunch breaks. They understood the magnitude of what I was building, even when management didn't. "Lenora, this is going to change the entire industry," Tom told me one evening as we watched the system successfully process its 10,000th transaction of the day without a single error. "You're not just solving our problems, you're creating the future." He was right. Core Harmony was now handling over 40,000 transactions daily across 12 states. Every order, every payment, every inventory decision, every security check ran through the system I had created. Without it, the company wouldn't just struggle. It would collapse within 72 hours. But I never bragged about it. I never demanded special recognition or threw my weight around. I just quietly did my job, knowing that I had built something extraordinary that was making everyone around me wealthy and successful. I thought that would be enough to protect me. I was wrong. 6 months ago, everything changed when Pinnacle Solutions was acquired by Titan Corp, a massive corporate conglomerate with a reputation for buying successful companies and stripping them for parts. The acquisition was presented to us as a wonderful opportunity for growth and expansion, but those of us who had been around corporate America long enough knew better. Marcus Wellington arrived as our new CEO 3 weeks after the acquisition closed. He was everything you'd expect from a corporate hatchet man: expensive suits, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that never reached his eyes. His first company-wide meeting was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. "We're here to streamline operations and eliminate redundancies," he announced to the gathered employees in our largest conference room. Titan Corp believes in efficiency and results-driven management. Some of you may find that your roles evolve or become obsolete as we optimize our human resources. Translation: we're going to fire a bunch of you and pocket the savings. Marcus immediately began targeting original Pinnacle employees, especially those with higher salaries or stock options from before the acquisition. He brought in his own team of consultants and analysts, people who had never worked in our industry but spoke fluently in corporate buzzwords about synergies and right-sizing. It was during a late evening at the office that I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I was working late again, debugging a minor issue in the core harmony system, when I heard voices coming from the conference room down the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and Marcus's voice carried clearly. "The beauty of acquiring Pinnacle isn't just the revenue stream," he was saying to someone I couldn't see. "It's this incredible software system they've built. Once we reverse engineer it and document how it works, we can replicate it for a fraction of the cost using offshore developers. The woman who built it is expensive, and she knows too much about our operations. She's a liability." My hands stopped moving on the keyboard. He was talking about me, about core harmony, about stealing my life's work. "How long do you think it would take to understand her code?" another voice asked. "Our technical team estimates 6 to 8 months once we have full access to her documentation and system architecture. Then we can let her go and implement this across all of Titan's subsidiaries. We're talking about potentially hundreds of millions in licensing revenue." I quietly saved my work and slipped out of the building through the back exit, my mind racing. Marcus wasn't just planning to downsize. He was planning to steal my intellectual property, fire me, and then profit from my creation for years to come. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to the changes happening around the office. David warned me privately that my name had come up in several closed-door meetings with HR. "Lenora, I think you're being targeted. Marcus has been asking very specific questions about your work, your salary, and your contract terms." I began documenting everything. Every time Marcus or one of his consultants tried to access my files without permission, every meeting where they discussed the core harmony system without including me, every attempt to get me to share documentation or passwords under the guise of collaboration, the atmosphere in the office became toxic as employees began getting laid off one by one. These weren't random terminations. Marcus was systematically removing anyone who had been at Pinnacle before the acquisition, replacing them with cheaper contractors, or consolidating their responsibilities into other roles. Tom was the first of my friends to go. He was called into HR on a Tuesday morning and escorted out by lunch. His crime? Insubordination for questioning why Marcus was making technical decisions without consulting the engineering team. They offered me 2 weeks severance and a non-disclosure agreement, Tom told me bitterly as we met for coffee after his termination. "I'm not allowed to discuss anything about core harmony or the work I did there. They're covering their tracks, Lenora. You need to be careful." Sarah was next. They kept her longer than Tom, probably because she had been asking fewer questions, but eventually, she too was called into the dreaded meeting with Janet Miller from HR. Unlike Tom, Sarah was offered a different deal. a transfer to Titan Corp's headquarters in another state, with a significant pay cut but keeping her benefits. They want me out of here, but they're being smart about it, Sarah explained when she called to tell me about the offer. If I refuse the transfer, they can claim I quit voluntarily. If I take it, I'll be too far away to help you or cause problems for them here. She decided to refuse the transfer and look for work elsewhere. Before she left, she pulled me aside with a warning that made my skin crawl. Lenora, Marcus has been asking questions about you that go way beyond normal business. He wanted to know about your personal life, your habits, whether you have family or close friends in the area. He's planning something big, and I don't think it's just about firing you. Be very, very careful. I realized then that Marcus wasn't just trying to steal my work. He was studying me, learning my weaknesses and vulnerabilities so he could manipulate me more effectively when the time came to make his move. The trap was being set, and I was the target. The attack came disguised as an urgent project request, delivered to my inbox on a Thursday morning with a red high-priority flag. The email was from Marcus himself, marked as confidential, requesting immediate modifications to Core Harmony's security protocols for what he called a high-priority client with special requirements. As I read through the request, my engineering instincts screamed warnings. Marcus wanted me to create backdoor access points that would allow external users to bypass normal authentication procedures. He claimed it was for a government client who needed special access for national security purposes, but the request violated every cybersecurity best practice I had ever learned. The timeline was impossible. He wanted the modifications completed and tested within 48 hours. The documentation he provided was vague and contradictory. Most telling of all, the request came through unofficial channels, bypassing the normal project approval process that involved security reviews and stakeholder sign-offs. This wasn't incompetence. This was a deliberate trap. I spent hours researching the supposed government client Marcus had mentioned. There was no record of any such entity in federal databases. The contact information led to a generic voicemail system. The project requirements, when examined closely, would have created massive vulnerabilities in our entire network infrastructure. I drafted a detailed response explaining why I couldn't fulfill the request without proper documentation, security clearances, and approval from our legal team. I outlined the potential risks and suggested alternative approaches that would meet legitimate security needs without compromising system integrity. Marcus's response was swift and telling. Instead of providing the missing documentation or working with me to find a solution, he immediately escalated to a formal disciplinary meeting. I need to see you in Conference Room B tomorrow at 9 a.m., Janet Miller informed me with a phone call that Friday afternoon. Please bring any materials related to the special project request. This is a formal meeting regarding your compliance with management directives. I knew what was coming. Marcus had set up an impossible request, knowing I would refuse, and now he was going to use my insubordination as justification for termination. But I had to play this carefully. If I could get him to reveal his true intentions, I might be able to protect myself legally. The meeting was an ambush from the moment I walked into that conference room. Marcus sat at the head of the table with a stack of papers in front of him, while Janet positioned herself with a laptop, clearly ready to document everything for HR purposes. The atmosphere was formal and hostile. Lenora, we need to discuss your refusal to complete the security modification project, Marcus began without any pleasantries. Your email response shows a concerning pattern of resistance to management directives. I kept my voice calm and professional. I provided a detailed technical analysis explaining why the requested modifications would create serious security vulnerabilities. I also suggested several alternative approaches that would meet legitimate business needs while maintaining system integrity. Marcus's face reddened slightly. That's not your decision to make. Your job is to implement the solutions that management requires, not to second-guess business decisions that are above your pay grade. Janet was typing furiously, documenting every word. I noticed she was only recording Marcus's statements and my responses, but not the context or tone of the conversation. This was clearly being orchestrated to create a paper trail that would support whatever action they had already decided to take. I understand the importance of following management directives, I replied carefully. However, as the architect of Core Harmony, I have a professional and legal obligation to ensure that any modifications don't compromise system security or violate industry compliance standards. That's when Marcus revealed his hand. Your so-called expertise is no longer relevant to this organization's needs, he said, his voice growing colder. We've consulted with external developers who have reviewed your work, and they've assured us that your systems can be managed and modified by more qualified professionals. Your resistance to collaboration and your insistence on maintaining exclusive control over company resources represents a liability we can no longer afford. The room fell silent except for the sound of Janet's typing. Marcus had just admitted, in front of a witness, that he had shown my proprietary work to external developers without my knowledge or consent. He had also revealed that they were planning to replace me with these more qualified professionals, but he wasn't done. Marcus reached into his folder and pulled out a document I had never seen before. We have documented evidence of your uncooperative behavior dating back several months, he continued, sliding the papers across the table. Missed meetings, failure to respond to supervisor requests, and refusal to participate in team collaboration initiatives. I looked at the document and felt my stomach drop. It was a fabricated timeline of incidents that had either never happened or had been completely misrepresented. A meeting I had missed due to a family emergency was listed as unexplained absence. My refusal to share certain technical passwords was characterized as withholding critical business information. Even my late-night work sessions were twisted into unauthorized after-hours access to company systems. These allegations are completely false, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I have emails and documentation that prove most of these incidents never occurred or have been misrepresented. Janet looked up from her laptop. Do you have that documentation with you today? Some of it is on my work computer, and some is in my personal files at home, I replied. Marcus smiled for the first time during the meeting, and it was a predator's smile. Unfortunately, company policy requires that any supporting documentation be provided immediately during formal disciplinary proceedings. Since you can't substantiate your claims right now, we have to proceed based on the evidence we have. This was when I realized the full scope of what Marcus had orchestrated. He had chosen the timing of this meeting carefully, ensuring that I wouldn't have access to my supporting documentation. He had crafted false allegations that sounded plausible enough to justify termination. He had brought in Janet as a witness who was clearly coached to support his narrative. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just firing me. He wanted to humiliate me first. We're prepared to offer you a choice, Lenora, he said, leaning back in his chair with smug satisfaction. You can spend the next 2 weeks training your replacements and properly documenting all aspects of Core Harmony for transition to our new technical team. In exchange, we'll provide a generous severance package and positive references for your job search. He paused dramatically before delivering the final blow. Or, you can continue to be uncooperative, in which case we'll terminate you for cause, immediately, with no severance, no references, and we'll pursue legal action for any company property or intellectual assets you attempt to retain. The threat was clear. Surrender my life's work willingly and get paid for it, or lose everything and face legal consequences for trying to protect what I had created. I looked at Marcus sitting there with his arrogant smile, believing he held all the cards. I thought about the Core Harmony system humming quietly in the server room, processing thousands of transactions while we sat here playing corporate games. I thought about the authentication protocols woven into its architecture, the safety measures I had built in years ago for exactly this kind of situation. I need some time to consider your offer, I said finally. Marcus's smile widened. You have until Monday morning to decide. But I should warn you, Lenora, that your cooperation in this transition is not optional. The company doesn't need you anymore. You're completely replaceable. He stood up and walked toward the door, clearly satisfied that he had won. Just before leaving, he turned back with one final insult. Oh, and clean out your personal items from your office. Regardless of your decision about the transition plan, your access to company facilities will be restricted starting Monday." As the door closed behind him, I sat there looking at Janet, who was still typing notes into her laptop. She glanced up at me with what might have been sympathy, but said nothing. I had been set up, betrayed, and humiliated. But Marcus had made one critical mistake in his carefully orchestrated plan. He had no idea what he was actually trying to steal. Monday morning came with the kind of gray, drizzling rain that perfectly matched my mood as I drove to the office for what I knew would be my last day at Pinnacle Solutions. I had spent the weekend thinking through my options and had come to a decision that surprised even me. I was going to let Marcus fire me. Not because I was giving up, but because I wanted to see exactly how far he was willing to go with his theft. I wanted him to reveal the full scope of his plan before I showed him why it would never work. The security escort was waiting for me in the lobby when I arrived at 8 a.m. Two guards I didn't recognize, clearly brought in from an outside firm, flanked me as I made the walk of shame to my office. Word of my impending termination had spread through the building over the weekend, and I could feel the eyes of my former colleagues watching as I passed their desks. My office had been transformed into a sterile staging area. Cardboard boxes sat ready on my desk, and I noticed that my computer had been replaced with a basic laptop that probably had restricted access to company systems. They weren't taking any chances. "You have 1 hour to pack your personal belongings," one of the security guards informed me. "Company policy prohibits removal of any documents, files, or electronic devices that contain proprietary information." I nodded and began the surreal process of dismantling 3 years of my professional life. Family photos went into boxes. My coffee mug and small desk plant followed. The awards and certificates that had once made me proud now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. But as I packed, I was also doing something else. Using the restricted laptop, I activated a series of protocols I had built into Core Harmony years earlier. These weren't malicious backdoors or sabotage tools. They were safety measures designed to prevent unauthorized access to critical system functions. The authentication protocols I had embedded throughout Core Harmony were designed to recognize not just passwords and access codes, but behavioral patterns and biometric signatures. My fingerprints on the keyboard, my typing rhythm, even the way I moved the mouse had become part of the system's security architecture over 3 years of daily interaction. With a few carefully crafted commands that looked like routine maintenance tasks, I initiated what I privately called Guardian Mode. Core Harmony would continue to function normally as long as authorized users perform standard operations. But any attempts to access core programming, modify security settings, or transfer administrative control would trigger increasingly restrictive safety protocols. I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply ensuring that the system I had created would protect itself from unauthorized tampering. By 10 a.m., my office was empty except for the furniture that belonged to the company. The security guards escorted me to the lobby, where Marcus was waiting with Janet and a man I didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit. "Lenora, this is Richard Barnes from our legal department," Marcus announced with barely contained glee. "He has some documents for you to sign before you leave." The papers were exactly what I had expected. A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, a non-compete clause that would prevent me from working in the logistics software industry for 2 years, and a complete surrender of any claims to intellectual property I had developed while employed at Pinnacle Solutions. In exchange, they were offering me 4 weeks severance pay and what Marcus called neutral references for future job applications. "This is quite generous considering the circumstances," Richard Barnes said with the practiced tone of someone who had delivered this speech many times before. "I'd strongly recommend accepting these terms rather than risking legal action." I read through the documents carefully while they waited. The non-compete clause was particularly vicious, designed to prevent me from finding comparable work anywhere in the industry. The intellectual property surrender was even worse, claiming ownership of not just Core Harmony, but any related innovations I might develop in the future. "I'll need my attorney to review these before signing," I said, handing the papers back to Barnes. Marcus's face darkened. That's your right, of course, but I should point out that this offer expires at 5 p.m. today. After that, you'll be dealing with a much less friendly legal situation. I smiled for the first time that morning. I understand completely, Marcus. I'll be in touch. As I walked out of the building carrying my cardboard box of personal belongings, I felt strangely calm. Marcus thought he had won, but he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between owning something and understanding it. The first signs of trouble began appearing within hours. At 2 p.m., customer service received their first call about a delayed payment confirmation. The caller was Morrison Industries, our largest client, reporting that their morning transaction batch was showing as pending instead of completed in their account dashboard. By 3 p.m., the new developers Marcus had hired were discovering that they couldn't access the administrative functions they needed to investigate the problem. The system prompted for authentication credentials that none of them possessed. At 4 p.m., David called me on my personal phone. He was still employed, though demoted to a supervisory role under Marcus's new organizational structure. Lenora? Something strange is happening with Core Harmony, he said, his voice tight with stress. We're getting error messages I've never seen before, and the technical team can't seem to access the diagnostic tools. Marcus is asking if these are problems you created deliberately. David, I didn't sabotage anything, I assured him, which was completely true. Core Harmony has built-in security protocols that activate when unauthorized users attempt to access protected functions. If Marcus wants the system to operate normally, he needs to follow proper procedures. What procedures? He's saying his team can't find any documentation about security protocols. That was because the security protocols weren't documented anywhere except in my head. I had learned long ago that the best way to protect critical systems was to ensure that certain knowledge remained with the person who created them. Tell Marcus he can reach me on my personal number if he wants to discuss technical support, I said. But remind him that I'm no longer an employee, so any assistance I provide would need to be under a consulting agreement. David was quiet for a moment. Lenora, how bad is this going to get? I looked out the window of my apartment, where the afternoon rain was still falling steadily. That depends on how stubborn Marcus wants to be. By 5 p.m., when Marcus's legal deadline expired without my signature on their documents, Core Harmony was experiencing what the new technical team was calling cascading authentication failures. Customer transactions were being delayed, financial reconciliation reports were failing to generate, and the automated inventory management system was defaulting to manual override mode. Marcus tried calling my personal phone that evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was furious and desperate. Lenora, I don't know what kind of sabotage you've implemented, but you're going to fix it immediately or face serious legal consequences. Call me back tonight. I deleted the message and went to bed early. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Day 2 of my unemployment began with 17 missed calls on my personal phone and a string of increasingly frantic voicemails from Marcus, David, and several numbers I didn't recognize. But I was in no hurry to return them. Instead, I made myself a leisurely breakfast and settled in to watch the situation unfold from the comfort of my living room. The news wasn't good for Marcus. Sarah called me around 9 a.m. with an update from her contacts still inside the company. Lenora, it's chaos over there. The overnight backup procedures failed completely, and they've lost 12 hours of customer data updates. Morrison Industries is threatening to cancel their contract, and the State Banking Commission has started asking questions about the payment processing delays. This was exactly what I had expected. The biometric authentication protocols I had built into Core Harmony weren't just password protection. They were woven into the very architecture of how the system validated and processed information. Without my direct involvement, certain critical functions would simply refuse to operate. But Marcus and his team didn't understand this yet. They were still operating under the assumption that they were dealing with a simple case of sabotage that could be fixed with enough time and technical expertise. Tom called me an hour later with even worse news. I just heard from a friend at Morrison Industries. Their accounting department is reporting that 12,000 customer accounts are showing corrupted data. Payment statuses are mixed up, delivery schedules are wrong, and their inventory numbers don't match what's in our system. They're talking about switching to Anderson Logistics immediately. Morrison Industries represented $3.7 million in annual revenue. Losing them would be catastrophic for Pinnacle Solutions, especially now when Marcus was trying to prove to Titan Corp that the acquisition had been worth the investment. The real crisis began around noon when the State Banking Commission launched a formal inquiry into what they were calling systemic payment processing irregularities. Apparently, the authentication failures had triggered automatic fraud alerts in their monitoring systems, and they were now treating the situation as a potential security breach. Marcus finally reached me that afternoon, not through my personal phone, but by showing up at my apartment building. I watched him through my window as he stood in the lobby, jabbing at the intercom button for my unit with increasing frustration. I let him stand there for 10 minutes before picking up the intercom. "What can I do for you, Marcus?" His voice crackled through the cheap speaker system. "We need to talk. This situation has gone beyond a simple employment dispute. You're putting the entire company at risk." "I'm not putting anyone at risk," I replied calmly. "I'm unemployed, remember? I no longer have any responsibility for Core Harmony or its operations." "Don't play games with me, Lenora. You know exactly what's happening up there. Those systems are failing because of something you did before you left." "Actually, Marcus, those systems are failing because your new technical team doesn't understand how to operate them properly. That's not my fault. That's yours for firing the person who built them." There was a long pause before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice had lost some of its aggressive edge. "What would it take to get you to help us resolve this temporarily while we work through our differences?" Now we were getting somewhere. Marcus was finally beginning to understand that he didn't hold all the cards in this negotiation. "I'm not interested in temporary solutions," I told him. "If you want my help, you're going to need to make some fundamental changes to how this situation is handled." "Such as?" "Start by apologizing to every employee you've terminated unjustly. Then we can discuss terms for a consulting agreement that recognizes the true value of what I created." Marcus's voice hardened again. "I'm not apologizing for making sound business decisions, and I'm not going to be blackmailed by a disgruntled former employee." "Then I guess you don't need my help as badly as you think you do. Good luck with the Banking Commission investigation." I hung up the intercom and watched him stand there for another few minutes before finally stalking back to his car. But the situation was escalating beyond Marcus's ability to control it through corporate politics and legal threats. By evening, Sarah called with news that made my stomach clench with genuine concern. "Lenora, the payroll processing failed. Nobody got paid today, and HR is telling people it might be several days before they can issue manual checks. People are starting to panic." This wasn't part of my plan. I had never intended for my former colleagues to suffer because of Marcus's arrogance. The payroll system was connected to Core Harmony's financial processing modules, and the authentication failures were apparently cascading into areas I hadn't anticipated. Tom called me an hour later with even worse news. The FBI showed up this afternoon. Apparently, the Banking Commission reported the payment irregularities as a potential cybersecurity incident, and now federal investigators are asking questions about data breaches and financial fraud. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was spiraling beyond anything I had imagined. Marcus wasn't just facing a business crisis anymore. He was potentially looking at federal criminal charges if the investigators concluded that the system failures were the result of deliberate sabotage. David called me at 11 p.m., sounding exhausted and desperate. "Lenora, I need to ask you directly. Did you plant some kind of time bomb in Core Harmony before you left? Because if you did, and the FBI figures it out, you could be looking at serious federal charges." I took a deep breath before answering. "David, I never sabotaged anything. What I did was activate existing security protocols that were always part of the system's design. Core Harmony is protecting itself from unauthorized access exactly as it was designed to do. Can you reverse it? Not remotely. The security protocols require physical presence and biometric authentication. But David, I need you to understand something. Marcus created this crisis through his own actions. He fired me, threatened me with legal action, and tried to steal my intellectual property. If he wants this resolved, He needs to start by acknowledging what he's done wrong. I'll talk to him, but I don't think his pride is going to let him back down easily. And Lenora, there's something else you need to know. The insurance company is threatening to cancel our coverage because of the cybersecurity failures. If that happens, we'll be in violation of several major client contracts. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the situation had reached a tipping point. Marcus had pushed too far and too hard, and now forces beyond either of our control were shaping what happened next. The question was whether his pride would destroy him before he was willing to admit he had made a mistake. Day 4 arrived with Marcus's pride finally cracking under the weight of impending disaster. My phone rang at 7 a.m. with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Lenora, this is Richard Barnes from Pinnacle's legal department. Marcus has asked me to reach out to you about potential consulting arrangements to resolve the current technical difficulties. I smiled to myself as I sipped my morning coffee. After 3 days of refusing to speak to Marcus directly, he was finally approaching this as a business negotiation rather than a hostile takeover. I'm willing to discuss consulting opportunities, I replied, but any conversation would need to happen in a neutral setting with my attorney present. That's perfectly reasonable. Would you be available to meet this afternoon at the Meridian Hotel downtown? We can reserve a conference room. 3 p.m. works for me. And Mr. Barnes? Make sure Marcus understands that this is a negotiation between equals, not an employer disciplining an employee. That relationship ended when he fired me. The Meridian Hotel's business center was exactly the kind of neutral, professional environment I had wanted for this conversation. My attorney, Jennifer Walsh, had arrived early and was already reviewing documents when I walked into the conference room at exactly 3 p.m. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Richard Barnes sat beside him with a thick folder of papers, while a woman I didn't recognize took notes on a laptop. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Barnes began with the careful tone of someone trying to defuse a bomb. We're hoping we can find a mutually beneficial solution to the current technical challenges. Jennifer leaned forward slightly. Before we discuss solutions, we need to establish some ground rules. First, Mr. Wellington will acknowledge that Miss Chen was wrongfully terminated. Second, any discussion of consulting services will be based on market rates for executive-level technical expertise. Third, Miss Chen retains all rights to her intellectual property, unless explicitly negotiated otherwise. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Now wait a minute. The termination was handled according to company policy and legal requirements. Actually, it wasn't, Jennifer replied, pulling a document from her briefcase. We've identified at least 6 violations of federal labor law in how the termination was handled, including potential violations of whistleblower protection statutes when Ms. Chen raised concerns about security vulnerabilities. Barnes glanced at the document nervously. Perhaps we could set aside the termination issue for now and focus on resolving the immediate technical crisis. I'm afraid that's not possible, I said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Marcus needs to understand that his actions have consequences. The current crisis exists because he chose to fire the person who created the systems he was trying to steal. Marcus's face flushed red. I wasn't trying to steal anything. I was making legitimate business decisions to optimize operations. By showing my proprietary code to external developers without my knowledge or consent? By demanding that I create security backdoors that would violate federal cybersecurity regulations? By fabricating performance issues to justify my termination? Jennifer slid another document across the table. We have documented evidence of intellectual property theft, including recorded conversations and email communications that were inadvertently copied to distribution lists. This was a bluff, but a well-calculated one. Marcus's face went pale as he realized that his conspiracy to steal my work might have left a paper trail that could be used against him. The room fell silent for several long minutes. Finally, Barnes cleared his throat. What would it take to resolve this situation and restore normal operations? I had spent 3 days thinking about this moment, and I knew exactly what I wanted. full reinstatement as Chief Technology Officer with authority over all technical operations. 60% salary increase to reflect my true value to the organization. Equity stake in Pinnacle Solutions, equivalent to what I would have received if I had been a founder. Written apology to all employees who were wrongfully terminated during Marcus's restructuring. Marcus started to object, but I held up my hand to stop him. I'm not finished. I also want David promoted to CEO to replace Marcus, who will be reassigned to a role where he can't damage the company further. Tom and the other wrongfully terminated employees will be rehired with full compensation for lost wages. And finally, Pinnacle Solutions will implement new employment policies to ensure that technical expertise is properly valued and protected. That's completely unreasonable, Marcus sputtered. You can't just waltz back in here and dictate terms like some kind of corporate raider. Jennifer smiled coldly. Actually, she can. Because according to our analysis, core harmony is integral to approximately 87% of Pinnacle's current revenue. Without Ms. Chen's cooperation, the company will be bankrupt within 2 weeks. The Banking Commission investigation alone could result in criminal charges against senior management. You're talking about corporate extortion, Barnes protested. No, we're talking about fair compensation for intellectual property that was never properly valued or protected, I replied. Marcus tried to steal my life's work and replace me with cheaper alternatives. Now he's learning that some things can't be easily replicated or replaced. The negotiation continued for 3 hours, with Marcus alternating between rage and desperate attempts to find some middle ground that would preserve his position and authority. But the mathematics of the situation were simple. Without me, Pinnacle Solutions would collapse. With me, it could not only survive but thrive. Finally, at 6 p.m., a call came in that changed everything. Barnes answered his phone and spoke quietly for several minutes before hanging up with a grim expression. That was the board of directors for Titan Corp. They've been monitoring the situation, and they're prepared to intervene directly if we can't resolve this crisis immediately. Marcus, I'm sorry, but they're prepared to accept Miss Chen's terms in full if it means avoiding bankruptcy and federal criminal charges. Marcus sat there for a long moment, staring at the conference table as the reality of his situation finally sank in. He had gambled everything on his ability to steal my work and eliminate me as a threat to his authority. Instead, he had destroyed his own career and handed me more power than I had ever imagined possessing. Fine, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll sign whatever you want. Jennifer pushed the prepared agreements across the table. These documents will reinstate Miss Chen with the terms she requested, promote David to CEO, and establish a transition plan for your new role in the organization. As Marcus signed his name to the papers that ended his reign as CEO, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. He had brought this on himself through arrogance and greed, but watching someone's career implode was still difficult to witness. There's one more thing, I said as he finished signing. I want a written apology. Not just to me, but to every employee whose life you've disrupted with your restructuring plans. Marcus looked up at me with eyes that held equal measures of hatred and defeat. What do you want me to say? The truth. That you made mistakes. That you undervalued the people who made this company successful, and that you're committed to doing better in the future. He took a piece of hotel stationery and began writing. When he finished, he slid the handwritten note across the table without looking at me. The apology was brief and formal, but it acknowledged his errors in judgment and committed to treating employees with greater respect and fairness. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Thank you, Marcus, I said as I stood to leave. I hope you'll learn from this experience. As I walked out of that conference room, I realized that I had done more than just save my career and reclaim my intellectual property. I had also learned something profound about the nature of power and value in the modern workplace. True power didn't come from job titles or corporate authority. It came from creating something genuinely valuable and irreplaceable, and then having the courage to demand that your contributions be properly recognized and compensated. 3 months later, I sat in my new corner office on the top floor of the Pinnacle Solutions building, watching the morning sun reflect off the downtown skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The nameplate on my desk read, Lenora Chen, Chief Technology Officer, and beneath it sat a small framed photo of the entire engineering team celebrating our latest achievement. The transformation had been remarkable. Under David's leadership as CEO, Pinnacle Solutions had not only recovered from the crisis, but had broken every revenue record in the company's history. Morrison Industries had not only renewed their contract, but had increased it to $5.2 million annually after seeing the improvements we'd made to Core Harmony's capabilities. More importantly, the Core Harmony system had become the industry standard. We were now licensing the technology to companies across the country, generating an additional revenue stream that no one had anticipated. The little startup that Marcus had tried to strip for parts was now being courted by major corporations who wanted to implement our innovations in their own operations. My new role came with responsibilities I had never imagined when I was just a senior software architect. As CTO, I oversaw not just the technical operations but also the research and development initiatives that would shape the company's future. The equity stake I had negotiated was already worth more than my previous salary had been for an entire year. But the most satisfying change was in the company culture itself. David had implemented collaborative management practices that valued expertise over hierarchy. We held weekly technical reviews where engineers at every level could present ideas and innovations. We established mentorship programs that paired experienced developers with new hires. Most importantly, we created ethical guidelines that prevented anyone from being terminated without proper technical review and justification. Tom and Sarah had both returned to the company with promotions that reflected their true value. Tom was now leading our client integration team, working directly with major accounts to customize Core Harmony for their specific needs. Sarah had accepted the role of senior security architect, developing the next generation of protection protocols that would keep our systems safe from the kind of corporate espionage Marcus had attempted. The employees who had been wrongfully terminated during Marcus's reign had all received compensation packages that covered their lost wages and provided additional funds for job training or education. Several had chosen to return to Pinnacle Solutions in new roles, while others had used the compensation to pursue opportunities that better matched their career goals. Marcus himself had quietly accepted a middle management position at Titan Corp's regional office in another state. The last I heard, he was working in operations oversight, a role that suited his administrative skills while keeping him far away from strategic decisions or technical operations. According to David, who maintained cordial professional relationships across the industry, Marcus seemed to have learned from his mistakes and was performing adequately in his reduced role. The federal investigation had been quietly closed once the Banking Commission determined that the payment processing issues were the result of security protocols rather than deliberate fraud. My cooperation with investigators and my willingness to demonstrate the legitimate nature of Core Harmony's authentication systems had helped clear up any concerns about sabotage or criminal activity. But beyond the professional success and financial rewards, the experience had taught me something profound about knowing your own worth and having the courage to defend it. For too many years, I had accepted the idea that being brilliant at my job was enough. I had believed that creating exceptional value would automatically result in recognition and fair treatment. I had trusted that corporate systems would protect dedicated employees and reward genuine innovation. Marcus had shattered those illusions, and in doing so, he had forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned that sometimes the people who benefit most from your work will be the first to betray you when they think they can get away with it. I learned that intellectual property and professional expertise are only as valuable as your willingness to defend them. Most importantly, I learned that you can't rely on others to recognize your worth if you don't first recognize it yourself. The Core Harmony system continued to hum quietly in our server room, processing over 60,000 transactions daily across 15 states now. But every time I looked at its elegant interface or watched its seamless integration of complex business processes, I remembered that it existed because I had been brave enough to envision something that had never been built before. Now, as I mentored young engineers and helped shape the future of our industry, I made sure they understood not just the technical aspects of their work, but also the importance of protecting their innovations and demanding fair treatment for their contributions. The woman who had once worked 18-hour days in silence, grateful just to have a job where she could practice her craft, had become someone who understood that expertise without advocacy is just expensive labor. Standing at my office window, looking out at a city full of companies that now use technology I had created, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond professional achievement. I had not just built a better system, I had built a better version of myself. The next generation of engineers would inherit a workplace where technical brilliance was properly valued, where innovation was rewarded rather than stolen, and where the people who create the future have a voice in shaping it. That was a legacy worth fighting for. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your hard work and expertise weren't being properly valued? What did you do to stand up for yourself and demand the recognition you deserved? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when you had to fight for your worth in the workplace. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with anyone who might be facing similar challenges in their career. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them most. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about workplace justice, professional empowerment, and standing up for what's right. Together, we can create workplaces where everyone's contributions are valued and protected. Thank you for listening to my journey from exploitation to empowerment. Remember, your expertise and innovations are valuable beyond measure, and you have every right to demand that they be treated as such. Never let anyone convince you that you're disposable when you know you're irreplaceable. Until next time, keep building, keep innovating, and keep fighting for the recognition you deserve.